everyone, this is Dawn. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to show you how to make 4 different cards using the Close to My Heart Mandala Vibes stamp set and thin cuts with black watercolor paper and colors. I'm using oxides, and I'm also using some metallic watercolors from Royal and Langnickel. I hope I said that right. So I'm setting up the mandalas on my Misty stamping tool because I'm stamping a whole bunch. I'm going to stamp with Versamark ink, and then I'm going to use white detail embossing powder to emboss the images on black. So I am inking up my stamps, and we'll get those down. I'll show you the process of heat embossing one set, and then we'll move on to card assembly. So actually we'll move on to coloring these images. So you sprinkle the embossing powder on your image, and then you tip it and tap off the excess. And then if you see any spots that still need to be covered, you add some and tap it off, add some, tap it off. So now it's ready to be embossed. So I've got my heat gun. It's underneath it right now, but you'll see me lift it and do it from the top as well. And as the heat starts to melt the embossing powder, you can see it change and get more intense. So I did this with several. Okay, and moving on, I have taped a couple of these images down with low-tack purple tape on a, I forget what they call these. They're surfaces for watercoloring. It's like a hardboard. And I'm just picking out some Oxide ReInkers. It's important to shake these up. There's something inside it that will click and tap when you shake. It helps mix the oxides up. So you shake it really hard, and then you only need a couple of drops. So what I've got in my pan there is like 100 times more than I really needed, but yeah, so you don't need much at all. A little goes a long way. So I'm just coloring in or painting in my mandala. So I'll take you through the painting of one, and then I did several of them. So the paper that I'm using is from Strathmore. It's Black Mix Media, and it is 184 pound with a 300 GSM weight. So it's nice and thick and heavy duty. So I'm just picking out colors, and we'll take you through finishing this one up. So I did some with the oxides and some with a metallic watercolor palette from Royal Langnickel. And I didn't get that on film, but it's pretty much the same process, just painting. This was just kind of a happy accident. I just wanted to see what would happen and if I use the ReInkers for the oxides and what it would look like. And so I tried a small area on this mixed media paper, and I loved the results. So I went forward with them. Okay, so these are all dry, and then I have die cut them with the thin cuts. That one's a metallic one, and then this one's also a metallic one. So let's make some cards. I'm going to start with this one. And I'm just kind of playing with color backgrounds. Some of the recent cards that I've made, I've used a lot of black and white, so I thought I would bring in some colored cardstock. This is Peacock, Close to My Heart. And I'm going to do a top fold A2 card just to change things up a bit. So I'm just kind of figuring out the placement and what I want this card to look like. So I brought in some happy birthday die cuts that I made with gold foil. So I have embossed this piece of peacock paper with the celebration embossing folder. It's in the January and February idea book. And I decided that the edges needed a little more definition, and this covers up the white core. So I brought in an ink dauber with peacock ink, and I just sponged the edges of that panel. And now I'm going to be brave, and I brought in my trimmer. I'm going to trim my mandala. I didn't want to cut it in half. It was kind of a little offset. So one side is just a smidge larger than the other. And I decided to cut it so that I could put the happy birthday sentiment in the middle. And then I brought in a couple pieces, scraps of gold foil paper, and I'm just going to add like a little smidge on the edges just to kind of finish it off. It needed a little something where I split the mandala. So I added that, and I just attached it with Tombow tape runner, and then I'm bringing in my fine tip scissors to fussy cut the edges of the foil off. And then I did the same thing with the other half. It just added kind of a cool touch, I think. Of the bunch, this is my favorite card. I think it could be, it's not terribly masculine, but it could be a card for a guy or a girl. So it's kind of tricky making masculine style cards, so I was pretty happy with this one. So I am gluing it down with Bonding Memories broad tip glue pen. I've got a black panel that is A2 sized. And then I'm gonna put my embossed piece down. And I started out with the broad tip glue pen, but found out that wasn't working. It wasn't giving enough glue on there, so I brought in the Tombow white glue just to make sure that all the edges are glued down on that black piece of cardstock. And I got a little smidge that seeped out, so I just brought in my rub and remove eraser and it got rid of it. Okay, so I'm not going to show putting foam tape on all these pieces and gluing down, putting glue on the sentiment, but I glued two die cuts of happy birthday, and then the gold die cut on top, so it's for a stacked look to give the sentiment a little dimension so it wouldn't get lost between the two halves of the mandala, because I'm popping those with foam tape. So I've got those glued to the card, and then I'm attaching those two halves with foam tape. And then I'll finish it off with some jewels. Gotta have a little bling. I use some darker blue jewels. So this is the first card. It's all finished. I love the way that one turned out. Lots of texture and interest. Okay, next one. This is the mandala that I painted, and I'm going to do a side fold A2 card, and I'm bringing in a piece of wisteria cardstock that I embossed with these stitched circles embossing folder, and I'm just kind of laying everything out to figure out where I want things to go. And that circle, it's a scalloped circle, thin cut, and I have thin cut a piece of pearl vellum with that thin cut, and then just kind of figuring out the placement, if I want it to be a landscape or portrait. I ultimately decided on landscape. And that stitched rectangle, I've also put a couple layers of white cardstock and then the black on top. Kind of framed that out, and I'm setting something heavy on top of it for it to set up and glue. And now I'm going to assemble the rest of the card. I'm attaching that vellum with some white glue from Tombow, and I'm just putting it in the area where the mandala is going to cover it, so that you can't see the adhesive. It'll be covered up. And then I'm putting that down with some foam tape. And then I found these, they're retired, sparkle flourishes in black. They were in my stash, so I decided to add that. And then I thought I was going to use this thanks that I cut with holographic paper, but then it didn't quite fit. It just wasn't working for me, so I'm bringing in a couple other things. And I white embossed this thank you. It's part of the Mandala Vibes stamp set, so I embossed that and then cut it with the Close to My Heart stitch circle thin cuts. So I decided that was working, so I added some foam tape to it and then added it to my card. And of course I added some jewels. They're from Pinkfresh Studio, and that's the finished card. I'll make a list of all the supplies that I used, and I'll list them in the description below. Okay, next card. I decided I wanted to bring in some blues. So I am doing a side fold A2 card. Can't remember if it was side fold. Yeah, side fold A2 card. And then I die cut, you'll see those leaves. It's a retired die cut from last fall. It's called Layered Leaves, and I die cut those in white, and I did 3 of them and stacked them. So now I'm adding some sapphire cardstock, and I have cut that with the stitched rectangles. And I'm going to get brave again and bring in my trimmer, and I'm going to trim off the side of this mandala. And then I'll add it to the card like that. This makes it look a little more interesting, I think. So I am popping that with foam tape. And then I'm going to add the layered leaves, kind of underneath it. I'll put something heavy on it so it can set up. I'm just figuring out where things are going to go before I adhere everything down. So that thinking of you sentiment is from the Say It with Style stamp set that is in the core book that's available until August. And it has a lot of awesome sentiments. And there's my card. So of course I added some jewels. And that's the finished card here. Okay, last card. I'm going to use a smaller mandala, and then I'm going to use one of the white embossed mandalas that I did not paint. And I'm just kind of laying everything out and figuring out where I want things to go. So I started to set this up with a white border, and then I changed my mind and decided to add a piece of black cardstock down. It's the good thing about using wet glue. You have just a fraction of a second to change your mind and pull something up. So now I'm going to add the wisteria cardstock. I also cut this with the stitched rectangles. It's kind of hard to see, but you'll see it in the close-up shots that there's stitching around the edges. And just kind of playing with placement. And I decided to use some of this wisteria grosgrain ribbon, and the glue hadn't set up yet around the edges, so I had just enough time to pull up the edges so that I could kind of tuck the sides of that piece of ribbon underneath with a glue dot. So usually, if I was thinking ahead, I would have attached the ribbon to the card, to the wisteria card first, and then glued the whole panel to the black, but this worked. So I just took a couple extra pieces of glue dots and tucked them under the corners to make sure everything was tacked down. And again, I'm going to bring my trimmer in and trim off the edges of the mandala. Okay, so now I'm just figuring out placement, and I've decided that the thanks that I've cut with holographic paper is going to work on this card, so I'll get to use it. Not that I don't have a million choices over on the left side of my workspace there. Okay, so I'm layering everything with foam tape, and I'm using another one of these Flourishes, sparkled Flourishes, and going to add the sentiment on top of the ribbon. And I'll glue that down with the white Tombow glue. And then of course I had to scatter a couple jewels around. This time, instead of putting them on the mandala, I decided to scatter them around in that white space above the sentiment and on the corners of the card. So I appreciate you watching my video. Please subscribe, and thanks for watching.